Murdorf and the Mortal Flaw, Book 1, Chapter 4, A Meeting at the Castle. Towering above large oak trees on a mount above Sayir stood the slate-colored castle. It looked tall and impenetrable, an edifice of both strength and beauty. A lofty wall of huge stone climbed around it. Above the wall were multiple turrets topped with impressive spires that reached to the heavens like a cathedral of praise, bringing symmetry to its background. Battlements surrounded the castle on all sides, offering a watchful eye in every direction. As Nadora and Nuvatian approached the ironclad gates, the knights quickly opened them. Nuvatian's horse has injured its front leg, Nadora said to one of the knights. Lead it to the stables and call for a stable keeper to examine it. Certainly, Princess Nadora. How many times must I tell you not to call me princess? Oh, but I choose to, madam. Nadora escorted Nuvatian into the castle. You know the way, she said, smiling. Nuvatian was a regular at the palace and knew where the meeting was being held. Nuvatian rushed up the winding staircase and down a long corridor to the door of the meeting room where Gilmanza, Windsor, Navi, Cozbi, and Nimri sat waiting. The solid oak door was opened, and light shone through the windows, illuminating the soft pearl color of the walls. You're late, crony, scolded Navi. Nuvatian closed the door and took a seat. The king began immediately. I have been up all night reading the words of the ancient prophets, including your ancient prophecies, Windsor and Navi. We must find the sword and see to it that its final destination is carried out. Furthermore, we must find out where the sword turned up and how it came into our land. The safety and future of our country, all the lands far and wide, are at stake. Unless that sword is found and its final destiny carried out, we will all be destroyed. How do you know this is really the sword of Darvan? Nimri asked. Well, we don't, answered Gilmanza. But we have no choice but to take Pete's word for it. Well, how incredible is this Pete? Nimri asked. Credible, Gilmanza answered. Well, the man does have a history. His actions have been reprehensible, one of the most ignoble and arrogant men I know. He could have been mistaken about the sword, Navi said. Yes, but the look in his eyes was one of horror. He looked as though he had seen something truly terrifying, Gilmanza said. Yes, I have seen that look before, Windsor remarked, deep in thought. We would be foolish to brush this aside, Nuvatian concluded. I say we search every home and turn up every rock until we find the bloody thing. Cozbi spoke with passion and enthusiasm, seeming eager to demonstrate his value among them. That would cause a ruckus, the king admonished. We mustn't advertise this. As for where to look, I know not what to tell you. Nearly half the kingdom was there last night. Just keep your eyes open for anyone or anything suspicious. He will make himself known eventually, but not until he is confident that he is powerful enough to subdue the people. He will begin his conquest on the outskirts of the city in smaller areas, building himself an army. In addition, he will gather the riders of Quadar around him, and he will begin to recruit others, building Darvan's kingdom. The king took a deep breath and addressed the larger questions regarding this strategy. As far as what to do with the sword of Darvan if you find it, do not try to retrieve it on your own, and do not seek it out alone. You must work in pairs, creating accountability to prevent the deceptive power of the sword from taking hold of you. And remember not to engage him who holds it. He is undefeatable with that sword. You will have to try another method. When you retrieve it, bring it immediately to the palace. As the group walked out of the meeting room, their faces were stern with concern for the well-being of the empire, except for Nuvatian, who had his mind on other things. Walking down the corridor of the castle, he found himself glancing through the open doors, hoping that he might see her without all that metal covering, even if it were but for a glance. What are you doing? The king asked, noticing Nuvatian peering into each room they passed by. Oh, nothing, Nuvatian answered with a stammer. I've just been noticing the decor in some of these rooms. All eyes glared at him suspiciously. It doesn't lean too favorably for a man to be preoccupied with decor, especially with such grievous matters at stake, Navi said. They all knew he was looking for the princess. As they walked out of the castle, she suddenly appeared around the corner. Nadora, how are you doing? Gilmanza asked, smiling. I'm well, and you, sir? Nuvatian came to attention, looking in her direction with nervous satisfaction. He took in her shapely form, now freed from that burdensome chastity suit, a near cure for a man's lust, and would be if it weren't for a man's hearty imagination. You are welcome to stay for lunch, the king offered his guest. Thank you, but we must be getting back to the city. Nadora turned, smiled at Nuvatian. The stable keeper examined your horse. He has a sprain, but he should be better in a few days. He wrapped his leg and will check it every few hours. He recommends you leave it here for the night. Well, how shall I get home? Asked Nuvatian. Or shall I just spend the night here? He asked, grinning at her. Oh, you're definitely going home, the king said, with a knowing look. He could sense the energy between his daughter and this brash knight. Nadora stepped in quickly. We have plenty of mounts. You may use one of ours until your horse's ankle heals. Come, and you may see your horse and choose another from among the royal mounts, so you can go home. If I must go home, replied Nuvatian, unable to take his eyes off of her. You must, sir, indeed. Yes, you must, she said firmly. Indeed, her father said, scowling, condemning the lusty eye of the knight. Gilmanza spoke. Well, I believe we need to be going. Don't you think, Windsor? He grinned at Nuvatian awkwardly towards Nadora. Yes, Windsor agreed. The king tried to dissuade them. Oh, why don't you hang around a little while? I would like to teach you a new board game I made up. I call it chess, named after me, of course. We would love to, but I think we need to get back, Windsor said. Maybe some other time. We need to get back for the celebrations tonight, Cozbi said. Well, if there is a celebration tonight, Windsor noted. Well, what do you mean? Well, fewish will show up after last night's incident, Windsor predicted. Fear will keep many inside, plus storms are coming. That will certainly ruin the festivities. Get your horse so we can get going, Nimri said to Nuvatian. Go ahead, I'll catch up with you later. Leaving Nuvatian to make furrows, the men left. Nuvatian followed Nadora to the stable, walking a step behind her, admiring her rear end. That's my boy, Nuvatian said, rubbing Rebel's neck. You'll be better in a few days. Since your horse is a stallion, I thought you might like this one, Nadora said, leading a black and white gypsy banner out of a stall. His yellowish-orange eyes were like jewels, topaz surrounding a ring of onyx. He's beautiful. Well, take him for a ride and see what you think, Nadora said, grabbing a saddle. Here, let me do that. Ever the gentleman, Nuvatian stepped forward to help her. Taking the saddle from her, he tossed it over the stallion. Laying down his helmet, Nuvatian mounted the horse, gathered his reins in his hand, and very lightly touched the side of the horse. The animal moved out at a brisk trot, seeming to have springs beneath his hoofs. Squeezing his reins, the stallion came to an immediate halt, just as Nuvatian appeared bareback on a gorgeous one herself, its long feathers gracing the ground. Well, what do you think? She asked. Perfect, replied Nuvatian. Well then, perhaps you should get acquainted with him, she said flirtatiously, tossing her unmanageable hair to the side as she nudged her mare forward. Nuvatian tapped his own horse, and the two rode out of the walled grounds, down a trail to the base of the mountains where flatter land awaited them. They galloped through the plateau of golden meadows, the verdant, craggy hills towering ahead of them. As they galloped across the fields, Nuvatian's long wavy hair swept out unruly behind her, tangles weaving their way into her tresses. She was a natural rider, seemed to be as one with her mount. As the pasture land receded, they slowed their mounts and finally stopped at the banks of the river. I hear you are quite the archer. Who did you learn from? Nuvatian asked, dismounting. Well, mostly from my father and some from Gilmanza and others. When I was 5, my father had a little bow and arrow made for me. My mother was mortified. She thought I should be all lady. I suppose my father always wanted a son. Less than a year after my father gave me that bow, my mother died. Since I was his only child, my father was pleased that I had an interest in the politics and military aspects of the kingdom. Nuvatian struggled to pay attention to what she was saying. Those lips, and thank God she took off that armor, he thought. After my mother died, she continued, my father didn't know what to do with me, other than to teach me what he knows. As she spoke, she was admiring Nuvatian's rugged but handsome appearance, the stubbly hair on his otherwise smooth dark brown face, and the dark brown eyes and dark wavy hair. Each in turn captured her attention. I was all my father had, and he was all I had. We became very close. We often spent time sword fighting, riding horses, discussing politics, and shooting archery together. Nadora leaned against the trees, relaxing a little more. After my father saw that he was thoroughly making me into a tomboy, he had some of the wives of the men on his court take me under their wing. I didn't like it because I wanted to be with my father shooting arrows and riding horses. I think they got more than they bargained for when they offered to take me on as a task. How so? He loved watching her talk. Her lips, they were full and inviting. I don't mean that I was defiant or anything. Just at times I suppose I had an attitude. Once some boy called me a stuck-up king's daughter, and I got into a fight with him. The women accused me of picking a fight. So did you whoop him? Oh, I don't remember. We just scuffed. It was no big deal. That was such a tragedy when your mother died. She would be proud of you, Nuvatian offered, running his hand across the back of her hair. Finally, he thought, he got to touch it. Thanks, Nadora said. There was a moment between them, but then she turned around to her horse. She looked up at the dark clouds rising from the east as she mounted. We should be getting back. It will be dark soon, and it looks like we might get some rain. I wouldn't want you to ride home in the rain. Oh, I won't melt. She turned her horse and said over her shoulder, plus your girlfriend would be wondering where you are. She then galloped off, leaving Nuvatian behind. What makes you think I have a girlfriend? Asked Nuvatian, trying to catch up with her. Her inquisitiveness assured Nuvatian that she was interested. Now he was making progress. The two raced across the fields, laughing as they rode competitively towards the barn, the sun already going down behind the dark clouds that hung in the sky. Finally they reached the barn. Nadora jumped off her horse and fetched Nuvatian's helmet, the one he brought for Nimri, but proved to be too uncomfortable for him. Come back when you can ride again, she said, handing him his belongings and looking into his brown eyes. Putting on his helmet, Nuvatian took one more look at the princess, etched her into his mind, and then rode across the castle grounds, vanishing into the trees. The sun was setting in the west, and dark thunderclouds were forming in the sky as though they would overtake the sunset, imprisoning it in darkness. The sky now showed signs of an imminent storm.